What happens when two of the most outspoken women in entertainment sit down for what was supposed to be a routine interview, only to discover they have very different ideas about responsibility, activism, and the price of speaking out? Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks, and don't forget to like and comment for more talk show coverage. The studio lights blazed across the set as the familiar theme music swelled through the speakers. The audience was on their feet, clapping and cheering as the hosts took their places behind the iconic table. The energy was electric, the kind of buzz that fills a room when everyone knows something interesting is about to happen. Whoopi Goldberg settled into her chair at the center of the table, adjusting her glasses and smiling at the cameras. To her left, Joy Behar was already making a joke to one of the producers. Sunny Hostin was reviewing her notes, and Sarah Haynes was chatting with a stagehand. Everything felt normal. Routine. Safe. All right, settle down everybody, Whoopi said, waving her hand at the audience. We've got a great show for you today. And I mean great. We've got an actress, an activist, and a woman who has never been afraid to say exactly what she thinks. Shailene Woodley is here. The audience erupted in applause as the screens displayed Shailene's name and a montage of her most famous roles. The energy shifted from excited to anticipatory. Everyone knew Shailene had a reputation for being outspoken. Everyone knew she didn't hold back. And everyone was wondering how that would play on a show known for its spirited debates. Shailene walked onto the stage with a warm smile, waving to the audience and hugging each of the hosts as she made her way to the guest chair. She was dressed simply, a cream-colored blazer, minimal jewelry, her hair loose and natural. She looked comfortable, confident, ready. Welcome, welcome, Whoopi said as Shailene sat down. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you for having me, Shailene replied, her voice soft but clear. I've been looking forward to this. For the next few minutes, the conversation followed a familiar path. They talked about Shailene's new film, her approach to choosing roles, and her love for the outdoors. She spoke passionately about her environmental work and her belief that small actions could lead to big changes. I think people underestimate their power, Shailene said. We've been conditioned to think that one person can't make a difference. But that's not true. Every voice matters. The audience applauded, and Whoopi nodded along. That's all well and good, Whoopi said, her tone shifting slightly, just enough for the attentive viewer to notice. But let me ask you something. And I'm asking this genuinely, not to start anything. Shailene's smile tightened just a fraction. Of course, when you're out there speaking about these issues, climate change, social justice, all of it, do you ever worry that you're stepping into territory that you don't fully understand? The question hung in the air. The audience went quiet. Shailene took a breath, her composure intact. I think that's a fair question. And I think the answer is that I'm always learning. I don't pretend to know everything. But I also don't think you need to be an expert to care about something. You just need to be paying attention. Whoopi tilted her head. But paying attention isn't the same as knowing what to do about it. And sometimes when celebrities speak out, it can come across as performative, like they're doing it for attention rather than actual change. The audience murmured. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the tension that made talk shows compelling. Shailene didn't flinch. I understand that perspective. But I also think it's a convenient way to dismiss people who are trying to use their platform for good. It's easy to say, oh, they're just doing it for attention, when you don't want to engage with what they're actually saying. Sunny jumped in. I think what Whoopi is trying to say is that there's a difference between advocacy and activism. Advocacy is about raising awareness. Activism is about doing the work. And sometimes celebrities raise awareness but don't stick around for the hard part. Shailene nodded. I agree. That's why I've made a point of being involved beyond just posting on Instagram. I've worked with organizations on the ground. I've shown up to protests. I've sat in meetings with lawmakers. I've done the work. But here's the thing, nobody sees all of that. They just see the photo op. And then they decide whether I'm authentic or not. Whoopi leaned forward. So you're saying the public is wrong to be skeptical? I'm saying the public has a right to be skeptical, Shailene replied. But I'm also saying that skepticism can be weaponized to silence people. And that's dangerous. The tension was palpable. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Whoopi held Shailene's gaze for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. You know what? I like that you pushed back. A lot of guests don't. They just nod and smile and say, yes, Whoopi, you're right. But you didn't. And I respect that. Shailene's expression softened. I respect you too, Whoopi. That's why I'm being honest. Because I think we both care about this stuff. We just have different ways of showing it. The audience applauded, a mix of relief and genuine appreciation. But Whoopi wasn't done. She had one more point to make. Let me ask you something else, Whoopi said, her voice dropping to a more serious register. Do you ever think that maybe, just maybe, some of that criticism is warranted? That maybe there are times when you've spoken too quickly, without having all the information? Shailene paused. For the first time, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. That's a really good question, she said slowly. And I think the honest answer is yes. There have been times when I've spoken before I had all the facts. I'm human. I make mistakes. But I also think it's important to separate constructive criticism from the criticism that's just noise. And that's something I'm still learning to do. Whoopi looked at the camera, then back at Shailene. You know, I'm going to be honest with you. When I heard you were coming on the show, I thought to myself, okay, here's another young actress who's going to tell us how to save the world. But you're not that. You're actually thinking about this stuff. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Shailene said quietly. That means more than you know. Joy leaned in with a grin. Okay, enough heavy stuff. Whoopi, are you going to make her cry? Because I can't handle another emotional moment today. The audience laughed and the tension eased. But in the control room, the producers knew the conversation had only just begun. The subject of celebrity activism, public criticism, and the responsibility that comes with a platform was too rich to let go. Whoopi signaled for a commercial break, and the studio lights dimmed slightly as the cameras cut away. But before the screen went black, Whoopi leaned toward Shailene and said something that didn't quite get picked up by the microphones. Something that made Shailene's eyes widen. The audience buzzed with curiosity. What had she said? What was coming next? The screen faded to black, but everyone knew this conversation was far from over. The lights came up again, and the audience's applause swelled as the show returned from the commercial break. The energy in the studio had shifted during those few minutes off air. People were whispering to each other, checking their phones, sharing glances that said, "Did you just see that?" The tension that had built in the first segment hadn't dissipated. It had only intensified. Whoopi was already leaning forward as the cameras found their marks, her eyes fixed on Shailene. Joy was nervously adjusting her necklace. Sunny had her pen poised over her notepad. Sarah looked like she was bracing herself. "Welcome back," Whoopi said. "We've been having a fascinating conversation with Shailene Woodley about activism, criticism, and responsibility. And I have to say, Shailene, you've given us a lot to think about." Shailene nodded. "I appreciate that. It's not always easy to have these discussions on live television." "Nothing worth doing is easy," Whoopi said with a half smile. "But I want to circle back to something you said. You mentioned that skepticism can be weaponized to silence people. But sometimes people use that argument to avoid accountability. They say, you're just trying to silence me, when really, people are just asking them to be more thoughtful." The audience was dead silent. Shailene took a moment. "I think there's a difference between someone asking you to be more thoughtful and someone dismissing you entirely. The problem is when the line between those two things gets blurred." Whoopi leaned back. "Okay, let me give you a specific example. When you spoke out about that pipeline project, there was a lot of pushback. People said you didn't understand the economic implications. How did you respond?" Shailene's jaw tightened. "I listened. I did my research. I talked to people on both sides. And I came to the conclusion that protecting the environment and indigenous communities was more important than short-term economic gain." "So you didn't change your mind," Whoopi observed. "I didn't change my core belief, no," Shailene replied. "But I did refine my understanding. That's what people miss about activism. It's not about having all the answers from the start. It's about being willing to learn as you go." Joy jumped in. "Okay, but here's the thing. Sometimes activists become so convinced of their own righteousness that they stop listening to anyone who disagrees. And then they wonder why nobody takes them seriously." Shailene turned to Joy. "I agree. The moment you stop listening, you stop growing. But there's a difference between not listening and not agreeing. You can hear someone's perspective and still disagree. That doesn't make you closed-minded. It makes you principled." Sarah leaned in. "But how do you know when you're being principled versus just being stubborn?" Shailene smiled sadly. "You don't. Not always. You have to constantly check yourself. You have to be willing to admit when you're wrong. And you have to be humble enough to accept that you might not have all the answers." The audience applauded. Whoopi watched her carefully. "So let me ask you this. Have you ever been wrong? Have you ever spoken out and later realized you didn't have the full picture? Shailene hesitated. Yes, there was a situation where I spoke out without fully understanding the local context. I apologized publicly and educated myself. It was a hard lesson, but necessary. Whoopi nodded slowly. That's honest. A lot of people wouldn't admit that. I'd rather be honest about my mistakes and use them to grow, Shailene said. Joy smiled. I came into this expecting to be annoyed. But you're actually really thoughtful. Thank you, I think, Shailene laughed. The audience laughed with her. But Whoopi wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. I'm going to ask you something uncomfortable. You're still very young. You haven't been doing this work for decades. So I have to wonder, are you speaking from experience? Or from idealism? The question landed like a punch. The audience gasped. Shailene composed herself. Idealism and experience aren't mutually exclusive. You can be idealistic and still understand how hard it is to get there. And I don't think you need to be old to be wise. Sometimes the people who've been doing this the longest are the ones who've become most cynical. Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. So you're saying experience can make you cynical? I'm saying it can, Shailene replied. I've met people fighting for justice for 40 years. Some are still hopeful. Some are burned out. The difference is whether they've kept their hearts open. The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Whoopi stared at Shailene. Then slowly she smiled. You know what? You're something else. I don't agree with everything you're saying, but I respect how you're saying it. Thank you, Shailene said quietly. Whoopi held up a hand. Before we go to break, I have one more question. This is the one I've been saving. The audience leaned forward. What are you really afraid of? Deep down, when you think about everything happening in the world, what scares you the most? Shailene's composure melted. For a moment, she looked young. Vulnerable. Real. I'm afraid that we're too late, she said softly. I'm afraid we've done so much damage there's no coming back. I'm afraid people have become so divided we've lost the ability to talk to each other. And I don't know how to stop that. None of us do. That's what keeps me up at night. The audience was silent. A few people were crying. Whoopi reached across the table and took Shailene's hand. Thank you for being honest. For being real. Shailene blinked back tears. Thank you for asking. The music swelled. Whoopi smiled at the camera. We'll be right back. When we return, I want to dig deeper into what we can actually do about it. The screen faded to black, but the audience was already buzzing. They just didn't know that the best was still to come. The show returned from the final commercial break with a noticeably different energy. The audience had been buzzing during the break, and the producers had to remind everyone to keep their reactions natural. The cameras found their marks, and the lights came up on a panel that looked like it had just been through something significant. Whoopi was sitting back in her chair, her expression softer than before. Shailene had uncrossed her legs and was leaning forward, her hands clasped together on the table. Joy broke the silence first, her voice carrying a nervous chuckle. Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I need a drink after that. And it's only 11 in the morning. The audience laughed, but it was a tense laugh. The kind that fills a room when people are trying to release pressure they don't fully understand. Whoopi didn't laugh. She stared at Shailene, her eyes narrowing slightly. You know what? I'm going to say something, and I want you to really hear me. I've seen a lot of young actors come through here. Some have something to say, and some have something to sell. And I'm still trying to figure out which one you are. Shailene's eyes widened, but she held her tongue. I'm listening, Whoopi. That's all I've been doing this whole time. Whoopi leaned forward. You stood up on that stage at the Golden Globes and talked about climate change. And I thought, okay, good for her. But then I found out you own your own production company. You've got projects in development. And I'm thinking, is this activism? Or is this branding? The audience gasped. Shailene's face flushed. Whoopi, I'm going to answer that, Shailene said, her voice steady but hurt. But first, I want to say something. You just implied that my advocacy is a marketing strategy. And that's deeply insulting. Whoopi didn't back down. I'm not saying it is. I'm asking. Is there? Shailene shot back. Because the way you said it, it doesn't feel like a question. It feels like an accusation. Joy reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. Sunny looked like she was about to intervene. Whoopi leaned back, crossing her arms. Okay, then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me everything you've done has nothing to do with building your personal brand. Shailene stared at her. Then she laughed, a frustrated, exhausted laugh. You know what, Whoopi? You're right. I wouldn't be doing this if nobody was watching. Because if nobody was watching, I wouldn't have a platform. And if I didn't have a platform, I couldn't help anyone. So yes, part of this is about visibility. But that doesn't mean it's not real. The audience was completely silent. So you're saying doing good and doing well can coexist? Whoopi asked. I'm saying they have to, Shailene replied. Because if you're not successful, nobody listens. And if nobody listens, you can't make a difference. I've had to make peace with that. Sunny spoke up. I think what Shailene is saying is there's a practical reality to activism. You need resources. You need visibility. Exactly, Shailene said, her voice softening. I know the system is broken, but I can't change it if I'm not in it. So I play the game. But I also show up. I do the work. Whoopi was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward again. Okay, prove it. Right now. Give me one example of something you've done that wasn't for the cameras. Shailene paused. Then she spoke. A few years ago, I visited a remote community in South America being affected by deforestation. I didn't bring cameras. I didn't tell anyone. I spent 2 weeks building a school and listening to their stories. I've never talked about that. Not once. The audience was stunned. Whoopi stared at her. Then she nodded. That's what I wanted to hear. Because showing up when nobody's watching, that's the real test. And you just passed it. The audience erupted in applause. Shailene wiped her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. Joy let out a sigh of relief. Okay, can we all breathe now? Because I thought the world was about to end. The audience laughed, and the tension finally broke. Whoopi reached across the table and took Shailene's hand. I'm sorry if I came off harsh. I push because I want to see what people are really made of. And you just showed me. Shailene squeezed her hand. I understand. If you hadn't pushed, I wouldn't have had the chance to say what I just said. Whoopi looked at the camera. Sometimes the best television happens when people stop performing and start being real. And that's what we just had. The audience applauded again, everyone on their feet. Whoopi turned back to Shailene. So what's next for you? Shailene smiled, eyes glistening. I'm going to keep showing up. Speaking out. Making a difference, even when nobody's watching. Whoopi nodded. That's all any of us can do. The music swelled, and the hosts began their closing remarks. The cameras pulled back, capturing the moment. 2 women, completely different, sharing a genuine connection nobody expected. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the credits rolled, but the audience didn't move. They sat frozen in their seats, still processing what they had just witnessed. Some were wiping tears. Others were whispering furiously to each other. A few were already pulling out their phones, typing out reactions to what had unfolded on live television. On stage, the hosts began unclipping their microphones, but nobody moved to leave. The energy in the room was electric. Whoopi was the first to break the silence. She let out a long breath and leaned back in her chair, pulling off her glasses. Well, she said, her voice hoarse, that was something. Shailene let out a shaky laugh. I didn't expect that. I really didn't. Joy was fanning herself with both hands. I need oxygen. I stopped breathing for a solid 2 minutes. Sunny laughed. That was the most honest conversation we've had on this show in years. Sarah nodded. I was genuinely scared at one point. But then it turned into something beautiful. The audience erupted in applause again, real and genuine. Whoopi turned to Shailene. You came in here, held your ground, and didn't let me steamroll you. That takes guts. I learned from the best, Shailene said. I grew up watching you fight for what you believed in. The audience applauded again. The aftermath. As the studio cleared, Whoopi put her hand on Shailene's shoulder. You hungry? I know a place nearby that makes the best pancakes. Shailene blinked. Wait, really? Really, Whoopi said. My treat. No cameras. No audience. Just 2 women having breakfast. Shailene smiled. I'd love that. Outside, audience members were being interviewed. One woman said, that was the most real thing I've ever seen. They didn't agree, but they respected each other. A man shook his head. I thought Shailene was going to walk off, but she stayed and fought. I have so much respect for her. Social media reaction. Within minutes, #ShaileneWhoopi began trending. One user wrote, 2 women who disagreed but came out respecting each other. This is how it should be done. Another posted, that was raw and real. Stop being cynical. Celebrities weighed in. One actor posted, I've sat on that couch. What Shailene did today took courage. Mad respect. One tweet summed it up. Nobody was fully right or fully wrong. They were just human. After the show, hours later, Whoopi and Shailene sat in a quiet diner. The pancakes were long gone, but they were still talking. Shailene showed Whoopi a photo of her grandmother. She used to say, "You don't have to win every argument. You just have to make sure you're heard." Whoopi nodded. "I like that. I can't believe we almost went to war on live television," Whoopi said. "Same," Shailene said. "But I'm glad we didn't." "Me too," Whoopi said. "You're good people, Shailene." "Right back at you." The final post. Later that night, Shailene posted a photo of the skyline. The caption read, "Today was unexpected. Hard. Honest. But beautiful. Thank you, at Whoopi Goldberg. Let's keep talking. Let's keep growing. Let's never stop being human." Whoopi responded, "Pancakes and milkshakes. It's a new tradition. Red heart." The final scene. Back in the studio, a producer stood on the stage. "Did you see it?" she asked. "See what?" She smiled. Two women who couldn't have been more different, finding common ground. That's what television should be. She walked off, then turned back. Let's hope it lasts. And there you have a talk show moment that reminded us all of the power of real conversation. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of the exchange? Did you agree with Shailene? Was Whoopi too harsh? Share your opinion in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories. Don't forget to like and turn on notifications, because the best conversations are the ones we have together. Thanks for watching. And remember, whether you agree or disagree, the most important thing is to keep talking.